crevices, and so you get that boundary layer where it's all just honeycombed within a layer of plaster. You know, you can try shaving that off, but then you're going to introduce artifacts even probably more extensive than you would get just with a saran wrap. And depending upon the depth of the contours, and oftentimes, you know, in leaf litter or in pine duff, the contours are very subtle. There's not real sharp edges between toes and things. It's just more of an impression of a large shape, rounded, blunted shape, blunted by the duff. So you can try. And this is where these are all interesting suggestions, and you need to experiment. And in the process of experimenting, you can accumulate a collection of your own footprints, your family's footprints, your neighbor's footprints, you know, your dog, your cat, your pet, and gain experience. Now here's one that's interesting. Here were some beautiful bear tracks in Northern California on some dry, it was mud when it stepped through this, but it had dried into a nice dusty layer. You can, if you're really concerned about weight, you don't want to carry 5 pounds of water or 10 pounds of plaster, then you can get a can of great stuff. And it's an expansion foam. There are different brands. It's an insulating foam that's used in you know, garages and attics and things to fill in around window jambs and door jambs. And it just fills up and it hardens. It's a polyurethane type of a foam. And what you do is there are different varieties. One is minimal expanding. You don't want to sit and really shake it up, shake it up, shake it up. You just have a pre-cut piece of cardboard that'll fit in your backpack along with a can of this. And I was under the impression it was a one-time use, but someone told me that you can actually take a little vial of acetone and you can pop that spray nozzle out and clean it out real quickly before it sets up and reuse the can time and time again if you want. But you just, you just kind of snake it into the space, lay the piece of cardboard over and stick a couple of rocks on top, and it expands and fills every nook and cranny, and the cardboard helps hold it down, and then it bonds to the cardboard. And then you lift it up, and in this case it was just ideal. A little bit of the dust stuck to it, created that dusty patina, and then you can use your pocket knife to cut it down, or a razor knife, and it's extremely lightweight. Carry out without any problem from a remote area. What about snow? When you mix plaster, it creates an exothermic reaction. If you try pouring that, some people have done it. This guy up in Ontario has a whole collection of footprint casts. Apparently he just pours the plaster right into this icy. Well, one way is if you ice it first. If you spray it, use a water spritz bottle. If it's cold enough, you can create a thin film of ice. And sometimes, if your mix is thick enough, it'll set up enough. But usually what happens is it gives off heat. The heat melts the snow dilutes the plaster. You think your thing's set up, but you pull it off, and the undersurface is just a soggy mess. It hasn't set up. So to solve that, and this is available commercially now, it used to only be available to CSI people and university faculty and so forth. But it's called, there are 2 brands, Snow Print Impression, Snow Impression Wax and Snow Print Wax, I think is the other one, different. One is from Sershi, which is a big CSI supplier. And these are some casts, or a cast of the 2 hind feet and knuckles of a gorilla down from the whole zoo. It's an aerosol can. You spray on this misted wax that creates a film, and you have to be careful. See, where you don't, if you don't get coverage, then you lose detail because the plaster in that spot will melt into the snow, and it'll obliterate some of the detail. But you mist on several layers, and then you mix a more viscous mix of your plaster, more almost like biscuit dough rather than pancake batter. And you plop that in, and then as it spreads out, it will bond to the wax. When you're making a cast like this, you want to also have some newspaper. Spread the newspaper out, and maybe you lay your coat over the top. The more heat you can keep in, the more you'll speed up the catalysis of the setting up of the plaster. So snow prints. Again, practice these things. Do these things at home before. Now what about hair? The first discriminating characteristic, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, Sasquatch do not have fur, they have hair. Fur is specialized hair that consists of mechanically adapted guard hairs, long, stiffer hairs, thicker, coarser hairs, and a layer of underfur. So here's a fox and a raccoon that have fur. But Sasquatch has more human-like or primate-like hair that lacks any underfur. It's a type of modified guard hair. And we showed this picture. See, now over here, these are three examples of that continuum from almost blondish color. Looks a little darker under the microscope, but if I had this out in the light, it would look almost white. And then going on to the brownish color, and then this is pretty dark with the ever-increasing amounts of eumelanin. But notice the shaft width is about the same as human hair, not much different, about 65 microns. So if you pick up the hair and it looks like a stiff, real stiff, a lot stiffer than your own head hair, it's almost certainly not Sasquatch hair. It's about the same consistency as our hair. It's just that they have longer and denser distribution than we do. What about scat? Oh, hair, by the way, hair should be stored in a paper envelope, not in a baggie, a Ziploc baggie, or if you do put it in a Ziploc baggie, quickly transfer it. Otherwise, mold and will quickly grow due to condensation within the bag. So a clean envelope or a clean specimen bag. Scat. They're probably large omnivores like bears. These are examples of bear scat. And you can see the variation in appearance. It varies with what they're eating at the time. If they're eating lots of greens like this, it looks like manure. Yeah, lots of manure. If it looks like this, they've been into the berry patch. If it looks like this, they've probably found a carcass. They're eating a lot of protein. Best to put it in, well, I would recommend that you do two or three things. We've been doing some interesting work with some search and recovery dogs. So the easiest way to handle that, and where we use some of these suspect scats, if it's just bear, these dogs are trained to just ignore it, not give it a second thought. But if it's something they're not used to, the handlers can tell by their body language that this is unusual. And sometimes we've gotten really interesting fear responses from the dogs when they're exposed to this kind of scat. So the easiest way to handle that, to take care of that, is to take a piece of the cord and just put it in a paper bag and let it air dry. Let it completely dry out. Okay? If you want to get DNA from it, if you think it's less than 10 hours old, and that's about the window of opportunity, beyond that, DNA is going to be denatured by bacterial action, then DNA is best preserved in 95% ethanol. Now, if you don't have access to ethanol, it's kind of hard to get it. For people, if you don't have access to a scientific stockroom or something, rubbing alcohol will work. It's not ideal, but it will work. Or if you can get 100% spirits or whatever, or rich spirits. Formalin is best. Put a little bit in formalin. Formalin is best for preserving any plant material in the scat. So if you want to have it analyzed for the contents, for the plant contents, what it's been eating, as well as any parasitical remains, any parasite egg husks or shells or whatever. Okay, tree breaks, stacked rocks, nests, these are other kinds of things. I've seen some really interesting ones. I mean, the most impressive one to me was one that Paul Freeman collected. It was about 3.5, almost 4 inches across. It had been split kind of like that. I mean, but even more so. It was twisted and bent. The tree trunk had just exploded into fibers. It looked like spaghetti, but still all connected across and then twisted and bent. But with such force on this kind of this sort of smooth bark that the outline of the fingers could still be seen in the bark with little beads of sap that had bled around the outline of the fingers. It was amazing. Unfortunately, that particular example, his son, it was so amazing, his son had taken it off to college when I acquired all this stuff from him. When we purchased his cast collection, I didn't get that specimen, and then subsequently they moved. Here's an example of those stacked rocks, often found on talus slopes or exposures with lots of rock where there are populations of rodents, pikas and so forth, ground squirrels, marmots. And usually, if that's the case, these are found in concert with pits that have been excavated, looking for the nests. So usually one or the other. If you're just finding stacked rocks like this, you might want to check and see if you're near an obscure section of a cross-country trail, because hikers and whatnot will create these to mark trails that aren't so visible. Especially if you're up above the tree line, and nest. This is a bear nest. Oftentimes you'll find scat associated with nests of any kind, but bears make nests with vegetation as well. So the important thing is with hair, with nests, with anything like this, is to look for that associative evidence. What is there that would, because many of my examples are non-Sasquatch examples. So what would convince you or persuade you to think that what you found is associated with Sasquatch versus something else? There was a question, Norm. I am going to not stretch it.
What's the purpose of the breaking of the trees like that?
Well, it's probably, someone else asked me that. My only response is it's probably territorial. It's probably marking a territory and or exhibiting strength, an intimidation sign. I can't think of any other reason to do that. All right, there's also an interesting aspect. This is a little more indirect, perhaps, but one that I think shows deference to the indigenous populations and their traditional knowledge, but to be aware of, look for, and document cultural sign, being sensitive to the feelings of those populations. But each area has some really interesting traditions. Kathy Strain is a great resource. She's very knowledgeable, but there are lots of people. As you develop networks, as you cultivate relationships with Native peoples, then they may share some insights. I already talked about some of that. Now here, let me see if this will, we're probably the same situation. Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, let's see. Well, this is good. Yeah, cool. You might not be able to hear it. Well, he's talking about the Tsonakwa, and he's saying that this is the cannibal giant, the cannibal woman, and he says we often tell our children about this. It's kind of a boogeyman to keep them in line, and then he chuckles. But he said he tells a little bit about her. But I just want you to see, this is very unusual to be able to watch this, because only recently the First Nations in Canada have taken a much more proactive role in documenting their traditions, because they're afraid that they're being lost and that the subsequent generations aren't picking them up. But let's see here. So you can see her pursed lips. You're using her hands to scoop up the children. She's covered with hair. In this case, she doesn't have a basket on her back. But then every now and again, let's see, here you go. So remember, she gets sleepy and tired, she's a little dim-witted, and she falls asleep. Oh, now she's waking back up. Oh, there she's falling asleep again. And so then the kids get away. All right. Okay, habitat distribution. We talk rainfall is an important element. So you can see in Idaho, there aren't a whole lot of spots where there's sufficient rainfall. Down the eastern coast and the central, especially up in the Panhandle. Up here, we've got inland rainforest that's very similar to the Pacific Northwest. The Cascade Ranges, the more purple it's getting, the more rainfall. The rainfall means more productive habitat, more resources. Here's that one figure I was telling you about. This is the Paranthropus. Look at the remarkable congruence. Now, this creature has remarkably huge teeth. Look at here compared to a human. The canines are right there. Those little peg-like canines, gigantic premolars and molars. It's really a Cuisinart. Communications. We're going to hear a little more about that right after the break. But it's interesting that the depictions of the natives really epitomize the sort of the two characteristic postures of the lips, either pouting or pursed, or pulled back to, when I got those in the wrong position, or pulled back to reveal the teeth to varying degrees, with the mouth open or closed. Now, are they using language? Well, I don't know. Great apes, and does that make them more human? Well, great apes are capable of learning language, of using syntax, using either symbols or signs when taught. So they have the cognitive ability. Perhaps the upright posture of the Sasquatch has remodeled the vocal tract sufficiently that it's capable of more articulate speech than its great ape cousins. That doesn't really make it human, is the only thing I would say. And then taphonomy, where's the body? Again, we've talked a little bit about things, but the scavengers, look at the squirrel munching away on that antler, not long for the squirrel. And sometimes look up, there's an interesting video where they did an experiment with time-lapse photography, and they documented the disposition of a elephant carcass on the African savanna. And within 2 weeks, there wasn't a trace of it, of this 2-ton animal. Gone, completely gone. Every bit and scrap was gone. So is it likely that we might not find traces of an animal the size of Sasquatch? We might find bones if you have access to limestone caves. That would be a place to look. And what are the origins? We talked about Gigantopithecus. Here's a very different reconstruction of what Gigantopithecus might have looked like, but they still stuck it in bamboo, which is a misnomer. It's not a bamboo specialist at all. Its teeth suggest that it's an omnivore, frugivore, lacks projecting canines. Gigantopithecus does, which is another thing in favor of, well, Paranthropus lacked, you should notice, lacked projecting canines as well. But it's not like a mistake or an oversight, because bears are depicted with very prominent canines, a feature that's obviously very compelling about them. And one more minute. This is another independent corroboration that's amazing. I got to go to China, and there, one of the witnesses who saw, and this was a figure we settled on, was closest to what he saw. He tracked it, and where it came up to a spring, and there was some muddy banks, it squatted down apparently to drink from the spring, and as it squatted down, the foot bent in that mid-tarsal break, and the pressure was concentrated over the forepart of the foot, and it left 2 tracks, a right and a left, that had that mid-tarsal pressure ridge. And look at the similarity. I mean, right down to the details of anatomy, with the navicular creating that bulge right there, and then the pressure ridge. This guy couldn't speak any English. He had really no education. He'd been in the army and then got a job as a game warden at this new Shenanjia Reserve, which is right in the heart of the Chinese Yaren lands. And yet here are these casts that are so remarkably similar in anatomy and in proportion. You couldn't ask for a different, more definitive example. All right, thank you very much.
Very good stuff. We just got a few announcements. We thought we would honor our long-distance visitors. Owen turned 13 yesterday, and in honor of Owen and his family, we have a cake for you guys to eat, okay? And instead of attempting to sing happy birthday, why don't we just give the whole family a hand for coming this far? Other things, we have donuts and coffee, donation or nothing. We'd like to get rid of those, but we do have a few large T-shirts we would like to also sell. So we'll take a 15-minute break and be back here for Jim's presentation. Thanks.
Hold on 1 second, guys. He's coming with the cake.
Okay. Oh, here's the cake coming.
I like happy birthday song.
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Owen. Happy birthday to you.